Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cosmic Conversations. I'm your host, Sheila Seppi, and I want to welcome each of you to this episode of the Conscious Awakening Network. Now, if you have not already done so, please visit our website at theconsciousawakeningnetwork.org. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button, and we would appreciate it. Now, this month, as I told you, my co-host is Ariel Patricia. She is an ordained interfaith minister and a sacred storyteller who feels passionately about sharing the deeper experiences and the wisdom of spirit. She is the founder and the CEO of the Sacred Stories Publishing and Media, a conscious online media network whose mission is to help write a better world. Together, we will bring you this entire month of goddess energy. So get ready to immerse yourself in this profound exploration of the sacred divine feminine, unlocking ancient wisdom and contemporary insight. So we're going to start off, and of course, Ariel will introduce her once I bring Ariel on, our second speaker along our journey, Joanna Kujawa. Now, here to introduce her is my co-host, Ariel Patricia. Hello, hello, hello. It's so great to have you here this month. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Sheila. It's wonderful to be here with you. And I really appreciate the Conscious Awakening Network, celebrating the goddess with us. When we got together and we were saying, let's do something in May and springtime and rebirth. And I said, what about the goddess? You were all for it. So thank you for your vision. Thanks for being tuned in and helping us celebrate. So tonight, we're going to be celebrating the goddess. We're going to actually be celebrating this book, which is a phenomenal book called The Other Goddess. So it's an interesting title, right? The Other Goddess, Mary Magdalene and the Goddesses of Eros and Secret Knowledge. So let me tell you a little bit about the author of this book, because she's a pretty remarkable woman. So Dr. Joanna Kujawa is an author, scholar, and she's a spiritual detective. Her book that we're going to speak about tonight is The Other Goddess, Mary Magdalene and the Goddesses of Eros and Secret Knowledge. So Dr. Kujawa received her BA and MA from the University of Toronto, Canada, and her PhD from Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. As an active academic for over 20 years, she uses her scholarly training to investigate topics other academics often pass over, such as, can spirituality and sexuality be experienced as one? Who was the real Mary Magdalene? And is there a lineage of goddesses now resurfacing in our collective experience of spirituality? And what really makes I think Dr. Kujawa and her book so fascinating is that she recognizes that and argues that in the process of recovering the healing power of the goddess, which I think many of us are familiar with and very much the mother archetype, she says we focus solely on the mother archetype and we've left out the other goddess, who is often misrepresented in mythical, historical, and Gnostic sources as a wise, mysterious, and in the possession of the healing power of Eros. So we have so much to dig into and so much to talk about. So Dr. Kujawa, Joanna, thank you for being here and welcome to Cosmic Conversations.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so glad to see everyone, including I see Shauna is here, who also wrote a wonderful book, and I think she'll be talking about it next week, and some other people that I also know from other interviews. So I'm very happy for being a part of this. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, Sheila.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just broaden this a little bit before we even get into the questions, because you also say that whether we're looking at Mary Magdalene, Sophia, Aphrodite, Inanna, which is Shauna's book is on, Hathor, Isis, the goddesses of esoteric Hinduism, that you find the archetype of the other goddess, right, the bearer of the mysteries of sexual alchemy, and that this can end the division between sexuality and spirituality. So Joanna, do we have a division between sexuality and spirituality in today's world?
I think that quite, yes, I think that it's a very definite yes. And I think that it is quite sad that very often, or almost always, especially in mass media and mainstream media, sexuality is portrayed from the like a lowest octave. So, you know, from the lowest point of view. And very often women who were called, you know, in the past, they were called that they had Aphrodite's gift, which is really an Aphrodite's curse, who were able to connect sexuality and spirituality. They were demeaned, you know, whether they were priestesses or whether they were even the goddesses or actually human women who carried this beauty, you know, of sensuality, understood as spiritually as well. So I think that there is something wrong with our the entire civilization, that we focus almost like obsessively on the lowest representation of sexuality. And yes, from that point of view, you cannot connect sexuality and spirituality because it is so dark, it is so demeaning, it's often very disrespectful of women. And the only form of sexuality that was ever accepted in mainstream media, it is the sexuality associated with motherhood, right? Which is kind of almost like overlooked, you know, just, yes, you know, now she's a mother, so she can be forgiven everything. We kind of forget how she actually became a mother, that there is actually a divine process which involves our sexuality, which involves our bodies, that, you know, but even allows her to be a mother. And when I was looking at the goddesses of the past, I realized that there is a huge number of goddesses, which I also like to see as archetypes in a kind of Jungian sense, you know, archetypes, or for example, the philosopher Plato was talking about ideas, you know, and they are somewhere there in the infinite space of consciousness that, you know, we can reach out to these ideas, to these archetypes of other goddesses that represented women and in a different way, that connected sexuality and spirituality. And I thought we really have to look into this, because like this is not apparent in our culture, this is not visible in our traditional religions. But as I discovered, this is quite visible, you know, in the marginal kind of versions of religions, which is the esoteric traditions, and also, you know, ancient traditions. So that was a fascinating spiritual journey, and a journey as a spiritual detective as well.
So I'd like to talk about two different points, but I'd like you to explain to the audience, first off, your definition of an archetype, because I think that that's it's a very powerful energy. And sometimes it's even overlooked or misunderstood. So when you use the term archetype, how would you explain that?
That's a very interesting question, because different people have different definitions. But I often rely on the definition of Carl Jung, who was I think the only spiritual psychoanalyst. He's from Switzerland, he's dead now. And, you know, he was talking about archetypes as stamps on our consciousness. So he says that these archetypes are actually a possible version of ourselves that are there, but, you know, we have to gain access to them and we have to gain awareness of them. Otherwise, we just slavishly follow what is presented to us as possible lives for us, as possible choices. So it's almost like different pathways in your brain, scientifically speaking, or different ideas that are actually existent, that this personalities actually exist on a more subtle level. So I'm so glad that, you know, we're talking about cosmic conversations here, because it allows me to move away from the kind of, you know, academic discourse. So, for example, when I was discovering the lineage of the goddesses, of secret knowledge and of Eros, I came up with some questions of who are they, you know, because yes, they're archetypes, you know, there's this kind of almost like possibilities for us, but they do somehow exist. So one version was, you know, this kind of ancient aliens version, but these are, and I may speak about these goddesses later if you wish, these are basically different entities from other dimensions that, you know, keep recurring and keep coming back to us to teach us the wisdom that we really need to fully evolve. And this is what I call goddess consciousness. And then the other version was that perhaps it's some kind of multi-dimensional entity that keeps resurrecting herself to teach us the lessons, you know. And the third one is that this is the archetype, exactly, that we actually hold them in our consciousness. And as we evolve, as we call upon them, we also bring them more and more into manifestation. So, and these archetypes were cast in our past, in our mythology, as these possibilities that we can also follow. And I think that is extremely important nowadays for us. Interrupt me if I'm getting carried away, because now with with what's going on in our civilization, with the development of artificial intelligence and so on, we move too far in the direction of masculine consciousness. And we desperately need to evolve in the direction of goddess consciousness, which basically is an appreciation of life. This is like goddess consciousness is, this planet is the goddess's garden. And when I speak about masculine and feminine, I don't mean men and women. I again mean it in a sense of kind of yin and yang, or Jungian sense, it means that every man has some feminine in him and masculine, and so does every woman. It's just the ratio differs.
Right. I know that earlier we were talking about Sanskrit and the fact that, this book actually, when you look at the Sanskrit language, is one of the first languages, and it also ties in with the Andromedans. And so I was really excited to hear about that because, like you, I also believe that all of these archetypal energies very well could be our cosmic fellows getting in on the excitement, could be our cosmic brothers and sisters coming back to share with us. I want to say this universal knowledge that it seems that we tend to forget over time.
Yes, thank you for this, and thank you for giving me this opportunity, because I'm actually writing about it in this book. I'm talking about it in this book, and maybe later when we have a meditation, I'll elaborate on Sanskrit, but you are so right on completely on these 2 points. You're completely right. So first of all, thank you for bringing it up about, our cosmic brothers and sisters, because as I said, sometimes it depends on the audience. I can or cannot mention this, but I completely believe in it. And I had experiences that I cannot define with an, 3D reality, right? So which are profound spiritual experiences. So I definitely believe that the goddess is some kind of either, a number of highly evolved sisters, or maybe one that keeps resurrecting and asking us, you have to fix it. Like your consciousness is not fully developed because you're focusing only on development of one form of consciousness, which is very kind of mathematical, logical, linguistic consciousness, and not the beautiful, what I call goddess consciousness, which is much more intuitive and which is much connected and which doesn't like dualities, like, for example, sexuality and spirituality. And Sanskrit, also another thing about Sanskrit, it is that as I studied Sanskrit, I learned that it has the same number of vowels and consonants, and it is considered also the language of creation. And I know from some people who study the Kabbalah, they also believe that Hebrew has the similar qualities. So whichever tradition you study, it is language from which you speak has a great power of manifestation. And Sanskrit, because it is so ancient and because we actually don't know where it is coming from, has a special power of manifestation. And that's why at the end of our talk here, I would like to perhaps teach us or repeat with me, the goddess mantra, because I think it is so beautiful. And from experience, I also know that it does bring the results. You actually start to embody the energy of a goddess within you.
Beautiful. And I love the name of your book, The Other Goddess. I love that.
Thank you. Thank you. I would just like to point out that this is also a beautiful cover by an artist, Charlotte Sophia, and I just love this cover. And I was thinking actually about different covers, and then in meditation it came to me, no, let me have the face I want to be. And I said, sure. And then immediately this fantastic artist basically offered this particular painting to be on the cover of his book. So I'm very grateful for this.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to hold the book up again because I agree, and the cover is striking, the painting is striking, and I think it really captures. And we're going to get into Mary Magdalene in a moment. There's a reason the cover's red, and there's a rose, and so forth. That is in honor of Mary Magdalene as one of the main goddesses. But it's interesting, you know, a few years ago, Dr. Kujawa came to Sacred Stories with this book proposal for a book on the goddesses of Eros. And it was outside my comfort zone. I will tell you, it's outside. So from an archetypal perspective, I was, you know, probably very linear, you know, very comfortable with the mother archetype. Maiden, crone, I got the crone down. Queen, I think I got the queen, you know, even if we're looking at life cycles. But when she started bringing in the goddesses of Eros, it was a real kind of, it was a little bit of a challenge for me to embrace it. But I felt that it was really important. There's an energy to it that is very, very powerful, and challenging in a way, but challenging in the idea of, can you open to this? Can you expand to this? Can we embody, you know, spirituality and sexuality together? And so I said, let me see what you have. Show me what you have. And I just found it really important. I found it really important that the goddesses of Eros, and that, as Joanna said in the very beginning, that we take sexuality out of the dark, out of the demeaning, out of the denigrating to women, and we raise it to the level that it deserves. You know, that it deserves, that there's a very strong spiritual component to sexuality. And we're gonna get into that, or Dr. Kujawa is going to get into that for us tonight. So I just want to say, if this seems, you know, a little outside somebody's wheelhouse or comfort zone, I was right there with you. But it's a very deep, profound spiritual practice is what we're really talking about. And so, Dr. Kujawa, I wanted to ask you, what was, I know this is your, you know, part of your life work, and it's important work. What was the kind of triggering point in your life that really brought you to this point that you recognized this and felt compelled to bring this wisdom forward?
Thank you, Ariel, for this question. It's a very good question. Thank you for this. But perhaps I'll first address, you know, what you said about your discomfort. And I actually originally shared this discomfort because when I was following a spiritual teacher from whom I learned, I would say, everything spiritually until I took off by myself, it is that I asked for, it was a Hindu spiritual teacher from a Hindu esoteric tradition, and I asked for a name because very often disciples ask for a Sanskrit name. And, you know, in my academic mind, I assume it will be Saraswati, like the goddess of wisdom, which is a kind of a more spiritual version of Athena. And I thought, like, what else? And I was just waiting for this, right? And he says, let me meditate upon this. And then, you know, he asked me for a darshan, you know, he asked me during the darshan, which is when you're viewing of a teacher, he gave me a little piece of paper on which it said Sundari. And Sundari is this really, truly erotic goddess, Hindu goddess. And I thought, what? You know, what is he talking about? Doesn't he see, you know, that I'm an academic and a writer? Where does this Sundari come from? But actually, I spoke to a friend and he told me, you know, I think you have to explore this. You know, there is a reason, you know, and I truly trusted this teacher, you know, there is a reason why he gave you this name. And then I realized, as I was exploring it also as a scholar and as a disciple and in my personal life, I realized that we often, especially women, I don't know about men, who I think always get a little bit more freedom in this arena, you know, I thought that we really suppress our beautiful sensual nature. And also it comes, I think, with this horrible aspect of patriarchy, which is basically, a sensual woman is either stupid or she's a slut, basically, right? Because again, they have to put her into this motherhood cage. That was the only way to be a woman. So as a matter of fact, I all my life was hiding behind the mask of Saraswati, which is actually here a beautiful goddess, which is a form of Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Just I would say, in my personal experience, has more spiritual aspects than Athena. And suddenly this, sexual goddess was thrown at me as my Hindu name. And I realized that I was completely unaware of the sensual energy that I was caring about myself. And in fact, because it was so unconscious, I was throwing it around irresponsibly. So sometimes I would walk into the room and other women would get nervous, or men would immediately interested. And I said, what's wrong with these people? Because I was completely unaware that I had it. So, and then I realized all women have it. We just don't know how to carry this, because the only way that we are told it is possible to carry it, it's in an irresponsible way, in a promiscuous way. It's never seen as spiritual. We don't know about spiritual way of doing this, right? So we usually suppress it, right? So then I thought, what if we look at sexuality from the highest octave? From the highest octave, not from the lowest octave, because this is done all over in every movie. Hollywood, loves that. All pop stars do horrible stuff on stage and so on. I cannot watch it. And I said, what if we look at it from the highest octave? And then I remembered, and that's the trigger. Then I remembered when I was, like a preteen teenager in Poland, and I was brought up as a Catholic. So in a way, I was lucky because I already had a concept of divine feminine as a Virgin Mary. And I went to this beautiful Baroque church, beautiful 17th century church, 16th, 17th century church in my hometown. And, to put flowers on the altar of Virgin Mary, which is, was done regularly. And in fact, in Poland at that time, Virgin Mary was the major deity. People worship Virgin Mary. And then I was pondering upon her, and kind of got to me, that she's the virginal mother, and I kind of couldn't connect it because I started to feel Eros in myself as well. And I thought, is it bad? Am I bad? What am I going to do about it? And then I realized that in the nave of the church was almost like hiding, but still very prominent in a kind of interesting way. There was an image of another woman, and she was always with the teacher, with Jesus, and her name was Mary Magdalene. And there was some erotic element there because, she was called a prostitute. And then I didn't question it, but I started to research it later in my life. And the second trigger, and then we can talk about, I can explain it when we speak of Mary Magdalene. And the second trigger was when I moved away from being Catholic and I started to follow classical Vedic teachings, which is the classical Hinduism. And I spent many years with different Vedantic teachers. I proposed a study group between myself, a Swami that I used to know, an Australian Swami that I met in an ashram, and a Catholic priest who just got his PhD in Sanskrit, Sheila, and he said he translated something. And because in his house, he was also keeping some interfaith meetings, and he had a Tibetan Buddhist monk living with him who just escaped from Tibet. And now he has a center of his own right here. And I said, why don't we study, Hindu scriptures? And the Catholic priest who just got a PhD in Sanskrit, he said, why don't we study the esoteric Hindu work that I've just translated, and it is the Kula ritual? And I said, sure. And I had no idea that the Kula ritual is actually a work of classical Hindu Tantra, where sexuality is taken from a highest shelf, so to speak. And what the problem with the Western view of Tantra is that they think that it's a form of Kama Sutra, which has nothing to do with that, actually. So I'll just share with you that once I wanted to write an article for a famous men's magazine about Tantra, and they said, no, our readers want to know what you do when you get high on sex. And I said, this is not what you do. It is from which level of consciousness you do this. But it was completely above our heads, right? It just says, what do I do with my hands? What do I do? I said, no, nothing changes. Just the level of approach, the level of consciousness from which you do changes. And this work, Kula ritual, which is a classical tantric work by a 10th century philosopher who actually compiled his works based on shamanic teachings of yoginis, from the Hindu Valley. So this is the Indus Valley, which is a different story. We don't have time for this, which was started by a woman yogini, Ambatriyambaka, but he put it in words. So this is what happens also very often. Men were more educated, so they put into words what the lineage of women already started. He is talking about the fact that it had to be usually a teacher, a spiritual teacher or a guru that choose the people who could participate in the Kula ritual because they were ready for it, they could approach it from a higher level of consciousness. Because if you read it from our current level of consciousness towards sexuality, then you think, that's why people think it's scandalous, because they think, it's an orgy. And I said, what are you talking about? Right? Because they see it from a lowest perspective, so to speak. And another thing about this work is that it is written in a very convoluted way, because when I speak about it, everybody says, I'll buy myself a copy. I say, good luck. Because we spent a year and a half going line by line with somebody who translated this. Because later in my studies, I have learned that it is called a twilight language, which means it was encoded in such a way that only if you're completely devoted to the text, you're completely devoted disciple, when you read it over and over again, and ideally that you are initiated by a master who can actually transfer some of this energy to you of higher consciousness, only then you understand it. So this is where spirituality and sexuality really meets for me. Not what we do it, not how we do it, but from which level of consciousness we approach it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Joanna, when we talk about this higher level of consciousness, much of the higher levels of consciousness or those advanced knowledge is considered secret knowledge, right? How are the goddesses of Eros connected with the secret knowledge, or from the mystery schools, or the secret esoteric knowledge?
So that's a very good question. Thank you. So in a way, it kind of comes back to Mary Magdalene for me, because at a certain stage, when I was already in my late 30s, I went to Jerusalem with two archaeologists. And I went there to the Church of Mary Magdalene, it was, I think, Eastern Orthodox Church, and on the Mount of Olives. And I saw Mary Magdalene being portrayed very differently. So she was dressed in red, and I'm going to elaborate about it later. So, and then she was standing there with her hand extended, and she had an egg, as it is understood traditionally, in her hand. And it just struck me then that she was standing there with such dignity, and she was not seen as a prostitute, this kind of penitent woman that, I've seen on Catholic paintings, and that she was actually offering us a gift of higher consciousness, because what is it if it's not a cosmic egg? And then I started to look at wondering, is she the only one? Because I started to have ideas, and I looked at different images of goddesses, that esoteric goddesses or the goddesses from our past. And I went from the Western tradition, I went as far as Sumer, where it's goddess Ninna, which is sometimes called the Anunnaki mother, talking about cosmic conversations. And she is she's portrayed sitting on a throne, like she's the major deity. Behind her, there's an upright serpent, which, depending to which esoteric tradition you want to study, represents either wisdom or awakened Kundalini energy, or DNA, fully evolved DNA, because I don't know, percentage keeps changing, but the majority of our DNA is called junk DNA because we have no idea how to use it or what is it about. And on the other, and between her and the other figure, there is a tree of life and wisdom. And on the other side of the tree, there's a male figure that represents humanity. And she, Nina, like Mary Magdalene, is, offering a fruit or an egg to humanity, which is high consciousness. And it really blew my mind, right? So in this respect, except that it was masculine and feminine on the other side of the tree of life and knowledge or wisdom, I didn't get anything erotic. But then I looked into Shauna's kingdom, and I realized that, goddess Inanna, which is a little bit later goddess, she is actually, she has this beautiful, her priestess and Juanada wrote this beautiful erotic poems about her and Prince Dumuzi, who was her partner. And she's often portrayed with either a weed or a serpent also in her hand. And then I was reading esoteric traditions. This also represents crossing between death and life, or maybe multi-dimensional crossing. And then I looked into goddesses such as like Isis, where the Eros is very prominent, who has very similar symbolism to goddess Nimna and goddess Inanna in visual terms. Ankh, which is kind of inverted serpent, and also a cross, which is also kind of a portal between death and life, or between dimensions. And in her story, her beloved husband Osiris was killed by his evil brother or half-brother Seth. And Isis, to resurrect him, had to find different parts of his body, because Seth cut Osiris's body into 14 or 42 pieces, depending on esoteric traditions. Both have spiritual meaning, both numbers. And Isis collected all of his pieces, including, but one of his and major piece of it was his penis, because she needed to conceive a child. She needed to conceive a child from Osiris, and so she needed his sexual organs. And she conceived a child, Horus. And what is interesting in this story, but from esoteric point of view, because recently I studied ancient Egyptian traditions, actually Horus represents the evolved humanity, because very often he is represented with a cobra coming out of his head, which is very similar to Hindu representations of awakened Kundalini. I see a question here, and you are very right. Mary Magdalene is not a prostitute, but I haven't gotten there yet, so I will cover this. So this is from a Western tradition. And then I started to look into Hindu tradition. And there's this ancient work called Mahatma Devi, which is an esoteric work of esoteric Hinduism, not a kind of classical Vedanta, which tells the story of Goddess Kali. And who doesn't love Goddess Kali, right, nowadays? So Goddess Kali, according to the story, actually was created from the third eye of Goddess Durga, because there was a terrible battle going on between demons or evil powers on our planet and the good forces and the gods and goddesses. So Goddess Durga created Goddess Kali as a warrior, so she's fierce and she's fearless, and she starts to slay all the demons. But seeing so much injustice and seeing so much evil in the world, Goddess Kali cannot stop herself, and she starts to kill also gods and goddesses and, the angelic powers on the planet. Until, and that's the erotic story here, she sees God Shiva, who is lying on the field, on the battlefield, and he looks like he's dying. And she sees his beautiful eyes, and she falls in love with him, and she makes love to him, and she resurrects him very much like Goddess Isis. And in my book, this book, I argue that Goddess Sundari is Goddess Kali who overcome anger with love. So that's the power of Eros. So this is the lineage of goddesses. And Mary Magdalene, in my opinion, is at the center of this tradition because, as far as I know, she's the last of these goddesses that I know. And she, like the previous goddesses, who are kind of forgotten, and people don't want, they don't talk about this part, this erotic spiritual part and the power of resurrection through love and Eros and even sexuality. She was just portrayed as a prostitute. And so, in my opinion, she was hijacked. But when I looked at it, and when I looked at the Gnostic Gospels, and now I've been studying the Gospel of Mary Magdalene for over 20 years, Mary Magdalene actually was not considered a prostitute until the 6th century, when a pope made a scriptural mistake, and just so maybe he was a bit of a misogynist, and he just assumed that the unnamed woman sinner was Mary Magdalene, but there's actually not a scriptural evidence that this woman was a prostitute, because even the woman, unnamed woman, who was never called Mary Magdalene, in the scripture was called harmatolos in Greek, which means somebody, a sinner, but in a sense like somebody who didn't pay the taxes, or maybe didn't observe Sabbath. Definitely not a prostitute, which word is porine, and this word is not even once used in the Bible. Okay, so just to say, even from a classical Bible thing, there is no evidence whatsoever. And the Catholic Church itself in 1969 admitted to this, that it was a scriptural mistake, right? But nobody kind of paid attention, I guess. And when you read Gnostic Gospels, which are the Gospels which were not included in the classical Bible, and they were usually written, some of them between 90 AD to the 4th century AD, they portrayed Mary Magdalene as the favorite disciple of Jesus, with whom he had a special relationship, because as the Gospel of Philip says, he often kissed her and made the disciples jealous. And especially Peter often says, "Teacher, why do you love her more than us?" And my answer is like, duh, there is a special relationship, there is a special connection through this. And the Gnostics argued that actually Jesus gave 3 teachings of levels, and one of them, the highest esoteric teaching of level, shared only with Mary Magdalene. Now, in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene discusses 4 levels of consciousness. So this is how it all connects when we talk about levels of consciousness. And depending from which level of consciousness you approach your life, anything that you do in your life, it depends, how you experience this, right? So this is actually the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. She is speaking about 4 clear levels of consciousness. And this actually made sense to me why, she supposedly, had to be exorcised out of the 7 demons. Because the last level of consciousness, when you are already on the highest level of consciousness, which is extremely difficult, you're pretty much there with the Buddha, Jesus, and, I don't know, if you're a normal human being, maybe like Eckhart Tolle, whom I respect immensely, and who seem to be able to stay on a higher level of consciousness, then you have last 7 things, that you have to conquer, that you have to get rid of them. And one of them is self-loathing, self-doubt, so like self-hatred, self-doubt. How do you dare? Where are you going, murderer? Like this kind of negative thoughts about yourself that want to stop you from ascension, that want to stop you from evolution, right? So I think that it's wonderful that Mary Magdalene, who is both portrayed in an erotic, although in extremely negative way, from a lover's point of view, is also, considered an author of a gospel that talks about these 4 levels of consciousness, which Jesus shared with her. And from that level of consciousness, everything is different. including sexuality. And I'm not sure how much audience is open to this, but I also had this experience, which was very spontaneous. And I can promise you that if this experience happens to you, and if a Kundalini energy is awakening to you during a sexual act, you perceive other dimensions of reality. You see particles of reality. You see reality as light, because this is when awakened consciousness is moving through you. So I know from experience that sexuality and spirituality are not separate. However, it just happened that I had this experience when I happened to study the Kula ritual, when I was a devoted disciple, of a guru, which I actually didn't seek this experience. It just happened to me almost like a gift of Shakti Kundalini, which is actually the highest goddess. So, because she permeates everything. So it is beautiful actually about Hinduism, because they talk about existence, consciousness, and bliss, and they are one. And one of the ways of getting into bliss, if you take it from a highest octave, is also Eros and is also sexuality. But be mindful, you have to take it from a highest level of consciousness.
Yes. I want to follow up on that just a little bit, because I know that with the tantric traditions, with the Hinduism and the Buddhism, that the Tantra involves the ritualistic practices of using the human body and its energies, including the sexual energies, as a way to really bring about enlightenment and spiritual liberation, because, these traditions don't really view sexuality as just procreation or pleasure, but it is a means in which to, I guess, receive, or a pathway to that transcendence. And so I think it's really important to talk about these things, because, like you said, there are many octaves when you begin to look at sexuality. And even the fact of, bringing up Mary Magdalene with, her awakening and purification, I think it's illumination and union that she talks about. These things are so important that we can take it and really apply it to our lives, because in order to, have any kind of a spiritual experience, we have to first have that awakening. We have to have that illumination. We have to have that purification. And then that union doesn't necessarily have to be a sexual union. It can be the reuniting of those aspects of ourselves. So I think the work that you're bringing through is extremely beautiful and very relevant to our times.
Thank you so much for this. And you are very right, because in the classical Tantra, it doesn't have to be sexual. It's just that people focus on this because, it is in our consciousness from a lower point of view, it's so radical. But in a classical Tantra, you can eat a piece of fruit and you can have an experience of a divine. Right? Like, this is the body of a goddess, this is Shakti Kundalini. This is the bliss of consciousness that I'm experiencing. So, and yes, you are right, it is ritualistic. So that's why actually this work that is considered normally scandalous, the Kula ritual, the ritual is a key word, right? It's a ritual word, and it's a key word. And that's why also there is a certain selection who can participate in this ritual. Having said so, to be fair, some people, but usually they were already disciples, or they were really, deeply studying something in this area, had spontaneous awakenings, through presence with a teacher, or through sexual experience, or some other experiences. So it is possible to also experience Kundalini awakening spontaneously through sexual means or other means.
Kathy, actually, so it's fascinating because Kathy, actually, I put that in the chat, that she had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, and it was like a sexual orgasm, and it was the highest level of bliss that she's ever experienced. So speak a little bit about a Kundalini awakening, because I do think that people feel that most times that has to happen through a sexual experience.
So first of all, I have to be completely open and honest here. But first time it happened to me was not in a true sexual experience. It was the second time. It was when I went through the what is called Shakti path, which is actually it was actually a ritualistic kind of awakening of a disciple, and I participated in it. And it's basically the teacher goes around as you meditate with a group of people, and he touches you on the forehead. And this is when I was in a deep meditation and actually was spontaneously meditating, like different doors to like different realities were opening to me, and I was in complete absorption of them. And this is when my spiritual teacher came up to me, touched me on my forehead, and then I had a spontaneous ritualistic, I guess, experience of Kundalini energy, and I started to feel a Kundalini energy moving through me, and I was completely overtaken by this. And in fact, observers who were in the group said that I started to do actually Hindu mudras, of which I had no idea, with my hands. So obviously some energy was awakening me. It was moving through me. And I started to, out of crying out of control. And then I started to laugh out of control, because first I experienced immense kind of cosmic sadness, and then immense cosmic bliss. And I also, the whole perception of time-space continuum changed, because suddenly the room, which is a normal kind of room in which we've been conducting these meetings, suddenly expanded. And I was like, it had a completely different shape. It had a completely different measurement, so to speak. And when it collapsed on me again, so I actually experienced like this reality is extremely fluid. If we just kind of overcome this kind of 3D, three-dimensional mentality. And this actually completely shook me, because it gave me this experience of other reality. And the second experience, in my case, was an erotic experience through erotic act. And when I actually felt that Kundalini energy in a very conscious way moving through my body, from the bottom of my spine, it erupted in my heart. And I want to stress that it was a conscious energy. And I had no volition. It was moving through me. It was something that was very ancient and wise. It was not me, but was also me. And it erupted in my heart, that I actually lit up physically like a bulb. And then it moved forward, and it went into my forehead. And then it paused there for a moment. I could see it traveling through me, not being able to do anything about it. And then it just decided, what I'm going to do with it. I'm just putting it, into simple terms. And then it took a conscious movement in my third eye, and again, like exploded. And I had this kind of cosmic experience of reality when I could actually see like particles of reality, and I didn't have a sense of any physicality for several days. So that's a very powerful experience.
Mm. We have a question from Rajashri Ma, and I think it's an important question, so I want to read it. And she says she's curious if you're saying, and I think for clarity, if you're saying that one needs to be already in the highest state of consciousness for erotic experiences to be spiritual. Or are you saying that one can transcend or ascend levels of consciousness via consciousness tantra sexual ritual? And then what are the risks of doing this work?
So actually, thank you. This is a very, yes, Kathy says it was scary at the same time. It opened all my, I guess, clairs or chakras and other gifts. That's true. It is a very scary experience. So that's why very often on my page, people ask me, oh, what about like dangers of Kundalini awakening? And that is because sometimes people think that it's Kundalini awakening and it just happens to them and now they're enlightened. Now that's not true. Now the true work starts. That's why I wrote this book, because it's my travel, through this spiritual experience. because then you've been given an experience, a glimpse of higher level of consciousness. And sometimes, at least in my case, I stopped functioning. I couldn't function actually anymore in a normal reality because it was so powerful, and I just wanted to go back there. And in my silly academic mind, eventually I started to think, but I almost finished my PhD. I have to finish my PhD first before, I go to this highest level of consciousness, which is ridiculous from this point of view, right? But this is when a true work starts. You've been given a divine gift. This is what the true reality is. This is your highest possibility. Now you have to almost like work yourself through it again. So the question, I'm returning to original question that Ariel just read from someone, I'm sorry. And the answer is that both are true. That means that once you're in a higher level of consciousness, you can approach consciously your your sexuality from that point of view. But also through ritualistic tantra, you can open up your consciousness to this experience. So usually, and people often forget that it involves often a transmission of energy through someone else, usually a spiritual teacher. Very often, it is also reading a spiritual text with great devotion. Because spiritual texts have an initiatory power. And I know it from the fact by studying Kula ritual and studying the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. The more I do it, the more I understand. But it's not an intellectual understanding. It is a higher level of understanding that actually the text conveys back to me because of my devotion. Not because I figured it out. I still don't understand. I just get insights. I still get insights after 20 years, right? And I get more and more because I treat it as this sacred text, and I give it offer my devotion, and I open up to this. And the same happens with a ritual, which can happen also during an erotic ritual. Having said so, there are people who had a very spontaneous experience of Kundalini awakening. They have never done anything, and it scared them because they didn't work. They didn't have an understanding of it. They were unprepared, so it scared them very much. And, why it happened, I don't know. It is a gift of grace. It could be, if you believe in reincarnation, that maybe they were working towards it, throughout their lifetimes, and now the gift was offered. It is a beautiful world full of miracles, right? But it sometimes, although can be scary experience, especially if it was not done with a teacher, or you have not studied this before. It's important to remember that however difficult gift it can be, because it rearranges our view of reality. And for me, I almost couldn't function for a long time. It is a gift that needs to be cherished because it gives you an insight into your own highest possibility. So yes, Kathy says, yes, it's changed everything. It does. And it is, I'm telling you, it is pretty scary. I thought as I said, from my academic point of view, what about my career? And, I always wanted to be a writer. And, now I cannot write. I wanted to be a literary writer, but now I'm not interested in it. Now I just want to study sacred texts. And, what my PhD supervisor thought I completely lost it, which I kind of did. So it makes things complicated. Right? But then, you hold on to this because you have to remember, as challenging as it is a gift of highest grace.
Joanna, what I appreciate about your work is that, as you said, it is important work, and it does bring us to a level of consciousness if we're open to it. But it's also grounded in ancient wisdom, and it's also grounded in the goddess cosmology and Mary Magdalene, and it gives us a greater understanding, and I think an honoring of the feminine experience as well, and the masculine experience, you know, because this is just not a feminine experience to have access higher levels of consciousness through sexuality and spirituality together. So I think it really gives a framework for people like myself, you know, to understand this phenomenon and not to just shy away from it, because as you said, there are many gifts within it. And one of the gifts you were going to share tonight is you were going to share a mantra. Sheila, is it okay if Joanna moves into the mantra? Because I know we're coming at the end of our time.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So this is a Sanskrit mantra devoted to goddess Sundari, which is it's quite interesting because although she's an erotic goddess, she has the same elements, symbolic elements as Mary Magdalene. And I really love the colors, the flower, the rose, the red hibiscus, the red dress. And also in Hinduism, originally, she was considered to be a very powerful goddess, which, you know, was transcended dimensions. I'm putting it in kind of modern Western language. However, like Aphrodite and Mary Magdalene, you know, she is now kind of forgotten or demeaned, you know, and just like beauty products are called after her. But it's again, you know, kind of hijacking of this higher level of consciousness. So I love this fact that goddess Sundari, which I described in the other goddess as a mature woman, not the 17-year-old goddess, you know, that is usually portrayed by patriarchy, because she had to have this time to live her life, to get over her anger, and to realize, you know, who she truly is. So I would like us to call upon this wonderful power of mature divine feminine, who is in full acceptance of her body, who has forgiven all the wrongs, and who claims herself. She claims her life. And by the way, the other goddess is my way of claiming my life, because I decided I am taking control of my discourse, of my narrative, because of course, I could have portrayed my life in a completely different way, right? The other goddess is not a victim. She has forgiven, she has forgotten, she has moved on, she has accepted everything, because that's why here she is, standing in her full glory, being an agent for a goddess. But it is really important to know how to call upon this energy. So if you would like to take a deep breath, and just maybe listen to this beautiful sensual mantra, you know, and it's good to move when you talk to it, because the goddess is the garden, the goddess is life, the goddess is not stillness. No, Shiva is stillness. Goddess is the creation, she is the Prakriti. You know, nothing happens without her. In esoteric Hinduism, Shiva is a corpse, a dead corpse without Shakti. Okay, so let's close our eyes. Deep breath. Om Lalita Tripura Sundari Soham. 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 Stay with this feeling. You have just called upon the goddess to enter you. Thank you. If you're interested, on my YouTube channel, I have this mantra with a nice music for 4 minutes, which is really affordable time-wise. and you can listen to this. It's very beautifully done by somebody who has this kind of talent, you know, to frame it. So I'm saying the mantra, and there is a music to this, and this is I think the easiest way to connect with the other goddess, apart of course, except for the book, of course, as well. Thank you.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. Before we begin to wrap things up, I do want to ask, is there anything that you want to share additionally about the book, or what people could expect to find in the contents that maybe we did not touch upon tonight?
Oh, thank you for giving me this opportunity. So the book is actually consists of 4 parts. The first part is talking about what we have just done here, which is basically discovering Eros and you know, the tantric tradition. The second one is all about the lineage of goddesses of Eros and secret knowledge, which, you know, are celebrated in ancient Egypt and in Sumer, and also in Gnostic Gospels, with Mary Magdalene at the center of it. And the third part, which I didn't have a chance to discuss, and also in the second part, that's my favorite part, it discusses the possibility of Mary Magdalene going to Alexandria in Egypt after the event of resurrection, which I think sets in a completely different light. And I am arguing that Mary Magdalene was actually a spiritual alchemist that was known in the 3rd century as a historical figure, Mary the Jewess, or Mary the Prophetess, also known as Mary the Alchemist. And she was a historical figure. So I'm arguing strongly in this book that this is what actually happened. And then in a third part of the book, I discuss the theories about Mary Magdalene later going to southern France. So there is one story from Provence. You know, some people in southern France, in Provence, believe that, you know, she went 15 years after resurrection. And I argue after she already been to Egypt, to France. And then there's a Cathar tradition, which basically is a kind of heretical esoteric group that lived in western part of southern France that did consider Mary Magdalene the highest disciple of Jesus and also his wife. So it's quite interesting. And in the 4th part, I bring it all together and I explain some messages from the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. I bring it together with the wisdom of erotic goddesses of secret knowledge from an esoteric form of Hinduism. So there is a lot there. And I think that if, you know, you can pick and choose what you want to read from this book. And also, I think it is an example, one of the examples of, you know, how to claim your narrative from a spiritual point of view, because this is what I really wanted to do with my book. Because, you know, our friends, professional friends, will tell us, you know, what about your career? Family will tell you how many properties do you own. Yeah, and they, you know, and this is not really the way to look at yourself. And some of us, especially I'm sure people who are present here, we put so much energy into, you know, our spiritual journey, into our spiritual evolution. And we should claim it. Like this book was an attempt for me to claim it this way. If I look at my life from the point of view of my spiritual journey, my goodness, what an adventure. What a story, you know? Never mind, you know, how many this, how many that I have. This is a life of wonder, and each of us had this life of wonder, and we just have to claim it. We just have to claim it, you know, from a highest octave, from the octave of our spiritual evolution and our spiritual journey, not how other people want to see us, but we can tell them how they can see us, right? Through our own, claiming our own narrative, claiming our own lives, as I was doing it with the other goddess.
Beautiful.
Looking for help from Mary Magdalene and other goddesses who did the same, right?
Hey, now where can people find your book?
So the book is on Amazon. So the book is on Amazon. It's published by Sacred Stories. You know, Ariel is here. So Amazon, The Other Goddess. I also have my last name is difficult to remember, but I also have a website. I have a Facebook, public Facebook page, Dr. Joanna Kujawa, Kujawa. And I have a Dr. Joanna Kujawa, Kujawa, a YouTube channel when I speak of the other goddess, of the other goddesses, and I also where I recorded the mantra for you. So it is which I believe it is really the most effective and also very easiest way of connecting with the energy of this particular lineage of goddesses.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. And I also want to visit with Ariel just a minute. Ariel, thank you so much for bringing Dr. Kujawa to us tonight. Do you have any final comments?
Yeah, I just want to say that I've really enjoyed this conversation, and Joanna, every time we have an opportunity to speak or for me to listen to you, I just am reminded, or I remember how glad I am that I stepped outside of my comfort zone and I embraced the goddesses of Eros through you, because it is it's very powerful wisdom, and it's our history, whether it's from this planet or it's our cosmic brothers and sisters, as Sheila and Joanna were referring to in the beginning. But and what you just said regarding us choosing to write our narrative, right? Choosing the narrative that we will write for ourselves. I think that that's very powerful. It's very empowering. And I think it's very much the goddess consciousness. So I'd like to probably just leave it with that and encourage everyone. It's if this resonates with you at all, to expand your look at the embracing of the goddess, that she is multidimensional. She is, there are many goddesses. The cosmology is deep, and Dr. Kujawa does actually a phenomenal job. She's a scholar. She's a researcher. She's a spiritual teacher. So there's a lot, as you said, in this book, and I'm excited we had the time to talk about it this evening. Thank you, Sheila.
And thank you so much. Thank you for being such gracious hosts, and thank you, Sheila, for having us. And thank you to everyone who came, and also thank you for Ariel to giving the other goddess the chance, because that's the only way she could be born. She needed the midwife of an enlightened publisher who could see a value in it. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it, and it was beautiful what you just said. Thank you.
Beautiful. And so Ariel will be with us throughout the month, and we will have more conversations on the goddess coming up. So everyone, you have been listening to Dr. Joanna Kujawa on the Conscious Awakening Network. So hopefully you'll be joining us next week. And until then, I want to thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I want to send many blessings to all of you. Namaste. And have a blessed evening, blessed morning, blessed afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you so much, everyone. Until next time. Bye-bye.